The dust of Redemption Creek settled thick on everything that August afternoon, coating the raw timber of the storefronts and the sweat on every brow. It was a silence heavier than the heat, broken only by the low, cruel murmur of the crowd gathered near the courthouse steps. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Vance, a woman whose world had shrunk to the space of a wooden platform, a makeshift stage for public shame. Her husband, a man who'd gambled away their last dollar on a phantom silver mine, had vanished weeks ago, leaving her with his debts and the town's judgment. Now, Mr. Sterling, the bank president and the town's arbiter of fortune, stood beside her, a ledger in his hand. He read her name, the amount owed, and declared her destitute. The crowd watched, a mix of pity, scorn, and a grim satisfaction that it wasn't them up there. Eleanor stared at the splintered planks beneath her feet, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't cry. The humiliation was a fire that had burned away all her tears. The heat shimmered off the dusty street. A child, too young to understand the gravity, pointed a finger. His mother quickly pulled his hand down, her own face a mask of stern disapproval aimed at Eleanor. A few men at the edge of the crowd exchanged quiet jokes, their laughter sharp and ugly in the tense air. Eleanor's gaze drifted past them to the dry goods store she and her husband had once dreamed of running, its windows now boarded up. Every face was a mirror reflecting her failure, her solitude. The sheriff, a man named Miller, leaned against a post, his hat tipped low. He was a keeper of the law, but today the law was simply the will of the crowd, and he seemed content to let it run its course. The sun beat down, and with every passing second, Eleanor felt herself disappearing, becoming nothing more than the town's cautionary tale. The silence was a cage, and she was trapped within it. Then a new sound cut through the stillness, the slow, rhythmic tread of boots on the wooden boardwalk. The crowd parted slightly, turning toward the sound. It was Jedediah Stone, a rancher who kept to himself out on the edge of the county. He wasn't a man for town affairs, known more for the quality of his horses than for his words. He was tall and weathered, his face carved by sun and wind, his eyes holding a quiet steadiness. He stopped at the edge of the platform, his gaze not on the crowd, but fixed on Mr. Sterling. The banker paused his pronouncements, visibly irritated by the interruption. Jedediah stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "That's enough," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made the air feel suddenly cooler. Sterling scoffed. "This is official business, Stone, a public matter." Jedediah's eyes moved from Sterling to the sheriff, then finally to Eleanor. "Not here," he said, his voice just as firm. "Let her be." A ripple went through the crowd. This was not the expected script. Sheriff Miller pushed himself off the post, his hand moving instinctively toward his side. Though he didn't draw, he looked at Jedediah, a question in his eyes. Jedediah met his gaze, unflinching. There was no challenge in his stare, only a statement of fact, a line drawn in the dust. The confrontation hung in the air. A silent battle of wills fought over the dignity of one woman. Mr. Sterling, flustered and red-faced, looked to the sheriff for support, but Miller remained silent, watching. The crowd's murmurs shifted from scorn to curiosity. But now they were witnessing something else entirely, something they didn't have a name for. Jedediah took another step, placing himself between Eleanor and the sea of faces. He said nothing more. He simply stood there, a silent guardian. Slowly, the tension began to break. The law had not been broken, but a higher one had been invoked. Sheriff Miller gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, not to Jedediah, but as if to himself. He straightened his hat. "All right, folks," he said, his voice louder than before, clearing his throat. "Show's over. Move along." The authority in his tone was what the crowd had been waiting for. It gave them permission to disperse without losing face, one by one. Then, in small groups, they began to drift away. The men who had been laughing shuffled their feet and avoided looking toward the platform. The women gathered their children and headed for home. Their whispers, now softer, more thoughtful. Mr. Sterling, robbed of his audience, slammed his ledger shut. He threw a venomous glare at Jedediah. "This changes nothing, Stone. The debt remains." Jedediah didn't reply. He only watched as Sterling stomped off toward the bank, his righteous anger deflated. The platform was no longer a stage. It was just a platform. Jedediah turned to Eleanor. For the first time, she lifted her head, and her eyes met his. There was no gratitude in her expression, not yet. Only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a flicker of disbelief. He didn't offer a hand, nor did he speak words of comfort. After a long moment, she gathered the frayed edges of her composure and stepped down from the platform onto the solid ground. Her legs were unsteady, but she did not stumble. She stood in the dusty street, the setting sun casting a long shadow behind her. The town was quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't heavy with judgment. It was empty, spacious, holding the possibility of a new beginning. Jedediah walked her away from the courthouse, heading not toward the main street, but down a side alley, away from any lingering eyes. They walked without speaking, their footsteps the only sound, until they reached the small, clapboard church at the edge of town. The pastor was outside, tending to a small garden. He saw them approach, and his face, initially creased with concern, softened with understanding. He nodded to Jedediah, then offered a kind, respectful smile to Eleanor. There was no pity in his eyes. Jedediah stopped at the gate. "The pastor's wife will have a room for you," he said, his first full sentence to her. "The debt. I'll speak with Sterling tomorrow. It will be handled." He had a small ranch, but it was clear this would cost him a good horse, maybe more. It was a steep price for a stranger's dignity. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice raspy. "Why?" He looked past her toward the open plains stretching out to the horizon, the colors of the sunset painting the sky. He paused, as if gathering the words from the landscape itself. "Some things just ain't for sale," he said, quietly. He turned and walked away, his tall frame receding into the twilight, leaving no doubt that the matter was settled. He didn't look back. There was no applause, no grand pronouncements of a hero's deed. The town of Redemption Creek went on. The next day, the sun rose, the dust settled, and life continued. But something had shifted. A quiet act of decency had been planted in the town's memory. A reminder that a person's worth was something that could be posted on a courthouse step or read from a banker's ledger. Eleanor started over, working at the church, her presence a quiet testament to resilience. The story was told and retold, not in loud boasts, but in knowing glances and hushed tones around dinner tables, out on the frontier where life was hard and justice often felt just as unforgiving as the land itself. It turned out that sometimes a simple act of mercy could outlast even the deepest shame. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more tales from the heart of the American West.